the Cherry Boys, Brice Cherry here alongside my baby bro, Denbigh. Uh,
Hey, everybody.
yeah, and I just thought, Denbigh, this would be fun to reminisce. It's 30 years, if you can believe it or not, since the Rockets won the 1994 NBA championship. What a glorious summer that was.
It was the best.
Yeah, and it feels like a great time to look back and think about and reminisce on that glorious season. Uh, so yeah, I mean, it should be fun
And we're kind of like super fans.
to say the least.
We're not
Yeah,
famous, but we're like the biggest Rocket fans that we know.
yeah. I was thinking about this today. I'm such an Akeem fan that I had Etonic shoes. Who had Etonics?
You and Akeem.
Exactly.
That's dedication. I didn't even go that far, and he was my favorite player, but
Etonic.
I didn't want to roll my ankle, so I never bought those.
They probably don't even exist anymore, I'm
Oh, no
sure.
way. That's funny. I forgot you had those. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
awesome. This is, I can't believe it's been 30 years, but
it
some ways
is
it feels like an eternity. In some ways, we can remember that like it was yesterday. So,
absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's take it back to tip off for you and me as Rockets fans.
okay.
So what can you remember about when you first started following the Rockets?
Well, so most of the people who are probably going to watch this are probably our friends and family, and they know our history. But if you don't know our history, we lived in Houston from 1978 to 82, and we were little. And I think living there at that time solidified us as Houston sports fans. And I can vividly remember rooting for the Oilers. We loved Earl Campbell
Love you,
back.
Blue.
Yeah, and I remember playing football. Yeah, playing football in the yard. So I remember the Oilers. To a smaller extent, I kind of remember the Astros, but during that time, I don't remember having a thought about the Rockets at all. I mean, we were little, 5, 6, 7. So I don't remember anything about the Rockets until I think it was the Christmas of 1984, which would have been Akeem's rookie year. And Granday, our grandfather, for those of you watching, our Granday gave us each amongst other things, but one of our presents for Christmas that year, he gave us each a poster of Hakeem Olajuwon. Remember that?
With the
And
with him kind of in the outer space. It
yeah, I
had
think he
like
was laying down. I think it was an Etonics uh, driven poster. I think it was promoting him, but it also the shoe. And I remember opening it up, and I was like, "Who's this guy?" I was like, "Who's this?" And I remember specifically, it didn't say Hakeem Olajuwon. It said Hakeem Abdul Olajuwon.
mhm.
I was like, hang on, I know Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but who's Hakeem Abdul-Olajuwon? And Grande was like, oh, this is the Rockets' new rookie, their new center. He's a star. He's going to be incredible, and just kind of building him up. And I was like, well, we better get some other presents too. But okay. And but I remember getting that poster, and it was right around the time that we started getting interested in basketball, both playing it, of course, watching the NBA. And then shortly after that, in '86, they go to the finals. And that was it. That was so exciting for us. It was game on from there when the Rockets made the finals. And I thought about this. I know you'll remember this too. It was easy for us to root for them, already being Houston fans. But our pastor, Larry Embry, and his sons were huge Celtics fans. I don't know why.
Mhm.
They weren't from there, and but they were huge Celtics fans.
Particularly Mark. Particularly
Yes.
Mark. I
But
don't
his dad,
remember
his dad, I don't know if Lawrence was,
Lawrence.
but his dad was too. Uh, and it just made it easier when you had somebody actively rooting for the Celtics. It made you want to root even harder for the Rockets. So that's what I remember about first, learning about Akeem and the Rockets in '84, but really that '85, '86 season, I think kicked it all off. Like we were all in after that for years to come.
Yeah, so I will echo some of what you said. I mean, obviously, I am what 16 months older than you, uh, and I would say I do have vivid memories of the Astros. I remember going to games at the Astrodome, uh, and those were the first pro sporting events we went to. Was to the Astrodome at the Astros games, and hearing Jose Cruz,
Yeah.
and seeing the exploding scoreboard and all that. Uh, and I vividly remember, Love You Blue, that whole era, because it was just everywhere. I mean, as ubiquitous as Who Shot JR was, Love You Blue was same in Houston. I mean, it was everywhere. You
Yeah.
couldn't go, during that era, you couldn't walk through the mall without seeing Love You Blue stuff.
Well, they were
Uh,
probably the closest, even though the Rockets went to the finals in '81, the Oilers were really probably the closest thing to Houston getting a championship.
yes, yes. And the Astros were good in 80, but certainly um yeah, Astros Oilers dominated the Houston landscape at that time. And the Rockets were kind of, the third tier. And so I'm with you. They were sort of like a vague apparition out there for a lot of that time. I do remember hearing about Moses Malone, and I would be like, Moses, huh? That guy's name is Moses. Uh, thought Moses was, 10 Commandments, but probably when they made their run in 81, we heard a little bit about it. Uh, I remember the poster you're talking about. I couldn't have pinpointed exactly when we got it. I just remember sometime around, getting Ralph and getting Akeem, becoming very familiar with the Rockets at that time. We moved to Brenham in 82,
Mhm.
and Brenham's just up the road from Houston for those who need some geography lessons. But so we were still in that kind of greater Houston
Oh
almost
yeah.
area, and yeah, as that 85-86 season played out, we definitely caught the fever. And at that time, um, everybody was pretty much Lakers fans or Celtics fans. I mean,
Mhm.
if you like when I walked through junior high, you had your Magic guys and you had your Bird guys, and it was just divided, and there were no Rocket fans walking around. I
No.
mean, and maybe they some started jumping on the bandwagon during that 86 season, but yeah, that was when we really caught the fever, and then from then on, like you said, we were hooked, and really couldn't get enough, I would say.
I bet, now that you say that, we were probably the biggest Rocket fans in Brenham, Texas.
Oh, I can remember having uh arguments with Walt Hanneth in high school because he was a big Knicks guy. He was a big Ewing guy, and oh yeah, and I mean I remember John Peters, of course, who set the national record for pitching wins for Brenham High School baseball. Uh, he was as big a celebrity when I was in high school as you could get, going through that national record, being on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And he used to call me Little Akeem because
Oh,
I'd always be walking around with like a Rocket shirt or a jersey or something on. And yeah, so, and I know John a little bit now, done stories on him and stuff, but I mentioned that to him
that's
before.
funny.
Yeah. So, they have some ups and downs, and they
A lot of downs.
a lot of downs, a lot of downs, a lot of mediocre teams. You know, Ralph Sampson's knees, gave out, and they traded him to the Warriors for Sleepy Floyd and Joe Barely Cares, and uh, you know, there was some really mediocre Rockets teams in that era, and yet we were still all in. Let's fast forward to the season we're going to talk about, going into that 93-94 season. there was a lot of residual motivation because of the way the 93 season ended.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
think we can talk about 93, 94 without touching on 92, 93. So
yeah,
it's
absolutely. So hit on that, but also, could you have imagined, a start like the Rockets had in 93, 94?
no, that was incredible. But so we started getting better around 90, maybe around 90. We started getting incrementally better. 91. And then that 90,
Don Chaney was coach of the year one of those years.
yeah, that's right. It was. I remember one year Keem got busted in the eye by I think Bill Cartwright and
Hmm.
went down for a number of months. And
I pretty
sometimes,
much hated Bill Cartwright after that.
oh yeah, his big old elbows. But that you always see those injuries to those star guys kind of raise the level of everybody else. So other guys coming into their own. But when going into that 92, 93 season, I remember thinking like, man, we're getting good. Like, we can be all right. And I don't know if you remember this, but so we also during that stretch, we love to talk about this all the time. And we remind all our Bulls fans that during 91, 92, 93, when the Bulls won the championship 3 years in a row, we played them 6 times. They were in the East, we were in the West. Played them 6 times in those 3 years, and we were 5-1 against them.
5-1, yeah.
We
And Vernon Maxwell had like this irrational confidence
Yeah, we'll
versus
talk
Michael
about him.
Jordan.
Yeah, yeah, he could play Jordan.
He loved to play against Mike, and then they had no answer. The Bulls did for Akeem. I
No
mean,
way,
a lot of teams didn't, but
except for
that
Bill Cartwright's elbows.
well, right, and yeah, that he broke. That was probably the first time I'd ever heard the words ocular cavity. Uh, but yes, big old. And we used to play basketball, and whenever somebody would be slinging elbows or something like Ronnie or whatever, we'd be like, "All right, Bill Cartwright, get,
That's funny. I don't remember
get
that.
yourself."
All right, so but with all that being said, I remember thinking like, we could beat those guys. If we could get to the finals, we could beat those guys. And I remember because I remember watching a lot of Rockets games that year. You were off in college, and I remember staying up late. Anytime there was a Rockets game on, I'd watch it. And I remember the last game of the season, Rockets against San Antonio, in San Antonio, at the buzzer, David Robinson tips in a shot. It was after the buzzer. It was after the buzzer, but they counted it. And it ties the game, sends it to overtime. Of course, there's no instant replay back there. They're not going to look at it, but the refs were like, no, it's good. So it goes in. They go to overtime, Rockets lose. With that loss, we end up with the same record as the Sonics, one of our nemesis. We end up with the same record, but they won the tiebreaker because they beat us head to head throughout the year. So if we face them in the playoffs, they got home court advantage. And that right there was huge because we smoked the Clippers in the first round. Second round, who do we face? The Sonics. Goes all the way to game seven in Seattle. Uh,
Yeah, and
yeah.
people who weren't born yet or don't remember like 80s and 90s NBA basketball probably don't have an appreciation for just what a crazy rowdy place it was in Seattle to
Oh
play.
gosh.
It was nuts, and
They're a tough team.
yeah, they were a tough team. I mean, they by that point they had Gary Payton, they had
Oh,
Sean
yeah,
Kemp,
yeah, they had a
they
good
had
team.
Derek McKee. They were a good team,
Yeah,
and
and so I remember we end up losing game seven. Some dubious ref calls. Of course, they got home court advantage. If I remember correctly, it went to overtime in game seven, I think, uh, and then of course we lose I think we lost by 3 points because I remember Akeem ended up with the ball and he tried to shoot a three at the end and missed, and so we lose. But if we win that, we're like, man, we could beat Phoenix in the Western Conference Finals. We could beat the Bulls, maybe beat the Bulls in '93. I don't know if we were ready yet. But so, anyways, all of that to say, it was a tough, tough way to lose that playoff series. But you really kind of looked at it like, man, a couple things go our way, but like we're really on the edge of being good.
mhm.
And I think that the players knew that. They carried that into 93, 94. And then, of course, Awesome
Yeah,
start.
and we should pause here and let's just talk a little bit about Rudy T. Because to me, uh, that was when it really started building. Like they
Yeah.
they they were decent under Don Chaney, but
When did they
you know,
hire Rudy? 92?
90, 92,
92. Yeah.
and of course, we've a lot of Rockets fans don't need the story, but if you don't know the story, I mean, Rudy, of course, had been, an all-star player with the Rockets, most famously known for, un- being the unfortunate recipient of a punch from Kermit Washington that just about killed him. I mean, it threatened his life. Um, and then, became a scout, became an assistant coach, but he was, the number two assistant coach under Don Chaney behind Carroll Dawson, who also had
Right.
been with the Rockets forever. He was a former Baylor head coach, Baylor guy. And CD really would have been the obvious choice to replace Don Chaney, but he already was having just some health issues and some
Right.
issues with his vision, and so they they presented it to Rudy instead, and Rudy took it, and to me, I mean, a little bit of the rest is history, but um, he just had such a good like connection with players.
Yeah.
He was
That's right. I'm glad
he
you
was
brought him
he was
up.
the ultimate players coach.
Yeah, definitely. And those guys respected him. You're absolutely right. There's no way we win a title without Rudy T.
Sure. So
Yeah.
that brings us to, yes, so the Sonics lost, like you said. uh there was a lot of, what if, or what might have been, from that. And
And motivation.
going into the 94 season, yeah, they talked about it in the championship video, about how they started off and they did training camp in Galveston and
Yeah.
some little high school gym. I think it was maybe Galveston Ball. And really went kind of old school, and have all these sort of feelings left over from the Seattle series, but also a lot of motivation and a lot of confidence because they knew how close they had been.
Yeah. And man, they stormed out of the gate. That was such a fun time. You
Oh
know,
my gosh, it
you know,
was
you know,
it was so fun.
14 and 0. And
Four,
then,
well, 15-0,
well, I
but
know,
yeah,
but 14 and 0 going into New York,
right.
against the Knicks, a team that almost was like a mirror image in a lot of ways of the Rockets.
Yes, but here's what I will say, and we'll obviously, get to the finals eventually in the matchup with the Knicks. But uh, yeah, so let's hold off on that. I'll get into that later.
But I remember watching that game. You know, I don't remember if it was nationally televised or not. I kind of think that maybe it was. I thought that it was, but regardless, the sports world was looking at it. It was a big deal, and of course New
In New
York,
York, in New
in
York,
New York, in MSG. So, and we just smoked them, and that just felt so good. It was just awesome, and I think that
it was it was validation.
that's exactly right. I think it was really everybody at that point was like, "Oh, you guys are for real. Like this team is for real." We knew it, but now the rest of the sports world and maybe the rest of the NBA were kind of like, on notice. Jordan had retired, so it was almost kind of like the league was wide open. Uh, the Bulls had put out the Knicks multiple times in the playoffs, so I'm sure those guys were like, "Hey, this is our year," and a lot of teams thinking this is our year, but here's the Rockets storming out, and we ended up going 22-1,
22-1.
which is just incredible.
Yeah, it was. It was an incredible start. It was the second best start in NBA history to that point. Yeah, the Knicks win I think was eye opening for the nation, but also for us too because it was like validation and like confidence. Going, oh my gosh, we may have a team here. We may have a legit contender. Um, yeah, it was so fun.
Should have won like
And
70 games. We should have been the first 70 game winning team.
shoot, yeah, I mean, obviously they went through some lulls after that, and we're going
Yeah.
to get into a trade that never happened in a minute. But let's dig into a little bit of the cast of characters.
All right.
So tell me what comes to mind when I say each of these guys' names. And we're going to start at the end of the bench with Scott Brooks.
Now, see, out of all the players you're going to list, I don't think he's the end of the bench. I think there's a couple.
That's fair. That's true. There are some coming that it's like,
I know I had to, when you sent me that, there was a couple. I was like, okay, I remember that name, but I got to look you back up. All right. So Scotty Brooks, spark plug. Loved that dude. Hard nose, short little white guy, at least short comparatively to the NBA. He's probably taller than us, but kind of
he might have been 5'10", honestly.
okay, well there you go. Well, I remember he had a kind of a funky little shot, but was a good spot up 3-point shooter. And you love that kind of guy. He's hard nosed, he's scrappy.
I can remember it was probably early in that season, but I can remember there even being a debate about minutes with Sam Cassell, Kenny Smith, and Scott Brooks, and like who would be the odd man out, and that it was even a debate says something about Scott Brooks. I don't think people who remember Scott Brooks, the NBA coach for the Thunder or whatever, probably don't realize that he was a decent NBA point guard. He was a backup, but
yeah, I mean, he was.
What you kind of remember him for on that team, though, was definitely, the towel waver, the end of the bench cheering guy, and that bench was engaged, man. They were into those games, and you need that on that kind of on a championship team.
So, like you said, he was coach for the Thunder, so he's obviously smart. He's one of those smart players. I remember you could count on him to bring the ball up, to not turn it over, to make a good entry pass. He played well. He was good. Great role player. I think he's probably a liability somewhat on the defensive end. And I seem to remember him playing more in the regular season than in the playoffs, per se. Particularly, you talked about minutes. I remember sometimes him closing the game, like him, in the fourth quarter. Kind of, there was like
he had played more of a role the year before because Cassell wasn't there.
Right. But even with Kenny, like you said, it was like a backup quarterback, little competition with who's going to close out the game. And I remember a lot of times it was Scotty Brooks. So I loved him. He was great. He was a great bench.
Matt Bullard.
All right, man. Stretch 4 before there was a stretch 4.
So when I was putting all the names in, that was the exact thought I had. And that's exactly right. Because that really wasn't a position back then.
No way. It really was. And I think, and this again, is probably a testament to Rudy T just being a genius and seeing how that would be a strength for our team. Throwing the ball to Akeem, everybody's going to collapse on him. Let's surround him with shooters. I know that sounds real obvious today, but there was a different, we didn't shoot the 3 like we do today back then, 30 years ago.
Exactly.
I mean,
I wanted to look this up, and we could still do this at some point, but I wouldn't be surprised if the 93-94 Rockets, to that point, that season maybe made the most 3-pointers in a season that had ever been made.
That would be worth looking up. That absolutely, because we
should
did
look that up. Because
so I love Matt. So good rebounder. Another slow white guy that he wasn't going to be your leading scorer by any stretch, but he could hit some open threes. But here's a couple of things I remember about him too. He was kind of, every once in a while, he could pull out like a poor man's Tom Chambers kind of dunk on somebody every once in a while, because he's a big old boy, 6'10", something like that. But every once in a while, he'd just get a good.
And you would get really excited when Bull would dunk, for sure.
Yeah. So I loved him. He was great. Good role player.
Yeah, number 50. And uh, a couple other things I remember, like when everybody else was like swigging champagne in the locker room, he's got like a Miller Lite. And of course, he later became a Rockets broadcaster
Oh,
and
that's right. I forgot about
joined
that.
the Rockets broadcast team and did a good job, I think, on that. He was funny, had good insights, So yeah, uh, definitely such a contrast to the four men of the day, because you
Mhm.
think about like Charles Barkley and Charles Oakley and Charles Smith,
Founders inside, yeah.
yeah, and Anthony Mason and all these guys that were big and strong, Horace Grant. But Bull was more slender and not a banger, but definitely a guy who could stretch the floor. And as you said, that was Rudy's MO, was to play inside out, surround Dream with shooters, and Bullard you could put out there as a big and you would get another shooter. So
Mhm.
all right. How about Earl Cureton?
Man, I hardly remembered. I remembered his name. I remember him being on the team, but I couldn't remember much about him. Uh, other than,
He
he was
was an
on.
NBA vet
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
like a
That's who I remember.
journeyman.
He was on the playoff roster, and you got to have those guys to, if one of our guys gets some foul trouble, you got to have another big like that you can put in.
Yeah,
Or
he was a six foul guy. Put him
yeah,
in, get a few fouls.
yeah. Um, that was pretty much. I bet, like you said, he probably had a great voice in the locker room, being a veteran, and I think he passed away recently, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. So
Yeah, that's sad.
uh,
Props to Earl Puritan.
Earl Cureton. How about Sam Cassell?
Sleepy Sam, man.
Love Sam Cassell
How you not love? You can't help but love Sam Cassell. He was a rookie. Dude comes in with
out
just
of Florida State.
confidence. Yeah, Florida State comes in with this confidence galore.
Hmm.
And maybe cocky as all get out, but super confident and exactly what our team needed. And I remember wasn't like a superior athlete. Couldn't jump out of the gym or anything like that. But he's a good ball handler, good shooter. He kind of had a herky jerkiness to him, but he could drive. He kind of threw people off with that. But I think his biggest asset was just his confidence.
Oh, he had a swagger,
Oh yeah,
and uh, I mean we'll get into it some when we get into the playoffs, but uh, the
not afraid to take a big shot.
number of big shots he hit was off the charts. He hit some huge ones.
Hang on, I remember in Akeem Olajuwon's biography, I remember Akeem specifically saying how much he loved Sam because uh, Sam was not afraid. He was full of confidence and he loved that. But Sam was not afraid to like kind of challenge him a little bit, not in a disrespectful way, but just like to motivate him and get him going. And Akeem loved him. He just gave raving reviews about him in his book. I remember that specifically.
I have such an affinity for Sam that there's been multiple times in recent years where the Rockets coaching job has come open and
Mm.
Cassell's name has been thrown around, and I've been like, yes, let's do it. Partially because Sam has put in his dues
Oh
and
yeah, a
has
lot.
been an assistant coach in the league now for a long, long time. You could argue that on that Rockets 93-94 team, I mean, clearly Otis Thorpe was probably the second best player in terms of maybe resume, but I mean, Sam ended up again. I haven't looked this up, but I know he made at least one All Star game later on. He became kind of a journeyman point guard, like he played
Yeah.
for the Bucks and he played for what, maybe the
He
Wolves,
played for the T-Wolves, yeah.
the Wolves. But he was a guy that could later in his career, was averaging around 20 and
That's
six or
right.
seven assists and
Yeah, he
stuff.
was super, he was talented. And
He was, yeah.
like you said,
But for that team, he was basically our sixth man. I mean,
yeah.
um, Mario Ellie also got a lot of minutes, but
We
you
don't
know,
we don't win game 3 of the finals without Sam Cassell.
or game 7 of the Suns, or
Yeah.
yeah, game 3 of the finals for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, big shot after big shot. And another thing I'll remember about Sam, early on, maybe that rookie year, he was in a commercial with, um, and I want to say it was a Nike commercial, and um, and it was all these guys, these young guys' moms in this commercial, but they had clips of of the players playing, and the moms were like riffing on the players, and Sam Cassell's mom was in this commercial,
Was she an
and
alien?
no, she did not look like an alien like Sam
Sorry, Sam.
did. Sorry, Sam, you do got a little bit of a TT look to you, but but there was this line in it, and our mother, who of course is a big Rockets fan because of us and really got into the Rockets, um, she would always repeat this line. She loved the commercial, but there was this line where Sam's mom said, "It's a no look pass. Anybody can do it."
Oh, I remember that. I remember that.
You got
Oh
to
my
find
God.
that commercial.
I
And
need to watch
mom would repeat that line, and she loved it. It's a no look pass. Anybody
that.
can do it. So yeah,
Love
oh,
Sam.
love me some Sam Cassell.
Love Sam.
All right, we mentioned him briefly. Mario Ellie. Mario Ellie.
Junkyard Dog. The
Yeah,
Junkyard Dog. Before there was PJ Tucker, there was Mario Ellie. Am I
yeah,
right?
for sure.
Oh man, I loved him. That was his first season with us. And dude, he fit in just awesome, tough player, knew his role and played it. He was a good defensive player, not afraid of anyone. He was not going to back down from anyone. Um, Good spot up shooter, but he could drive and dunk on people too.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, he was 6'5", uh, kind of a 2-3,
yeah,
uh,
yeah, he could play a
and
couple of positions.
yeah, maybe a little undersized as a three, but was such, like you said, such a dog um that you didn't mind him mixing it up in there or guarding bigger guys. He had a toughness to him. He was another guy unafraid to take the big shot.
Yeah, yeah, as we'll
I mean,
see.
obviously we know about the kiss of death from 95, but um yeah, had some huge shots.
They were making good moves back then, the front office, if you really think about it. Because I think you can look at him. I mean, he might have been like the final missing piece that we needed that year already drafted Ori, they already drafted Sam. Then they get this guy, another 6 man, another bench guy. He could start. He may have started a few times during the season, for injury players or whatever. But another one of those guys who was just, you got to have a dog on your team like that,
hmm
motivator.
Yeah,
But it's,
had played with the Warriors, uh, right?
yeah, I played with them, played with Portland.
Yeah, and I remember him on the championship video saying, when he was talking about being in the finals and getting calls from guys like Mitch Richmond and Chris Mullen and stuff who had been all stars,
Mm,
and them going, man, I would trade it just for a chance to do
mm,
what you're doing right now.
yeah.
Everybody wants a ring, and yeah, he was critical.
I think no, one last thing on him. I think he was another one of those defensive anchors. I think sometimes that team gets overlooked for how good defensively they were. Obviously, you have Akeem, Defensive Player of the Year, but you got Mad Max, great defensive player. You got Mario Ellie. He's hard nosed. He's going to give you 100% effort. Even Robert Ory turned into a good kind of lanky defensive player. Could defend guys on.
Yeah, I think Mario could guard multiple positions.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Carl Herrera, amigo,
That's right.
amigo.
Amigo, I forgot about that. I loved that dude. I mean, we say that we loved everybody on that team because they brought us the title, but he seemed like a real nice, easygoing kind of guy. I think he'd been with us for a couple years at that point. Another role player. He knew his role. He wasn't gonna be your leading scorer most nights, anything like that. But he was a good rebounder. Uh, Another one of those guys that probably gave some good effort on the defensive end. Kind of had a funky looking shot at times.
He could face you up as a four man, uh, and um and hit these crazy runners
Yeah,
off the bounce off the glass, uh, and
a lot of hustle points, a lot of putback stuff.
right. And he had some big moments in the playoffs,
He did.
including
Yeah, he did.
um, I want to say game 6 of the finals. Uh, they had kind of gotten bogged down. Those Rockets, this team did have some lulls offensively sometimes,
Sure.
and some of it was turnover related. Uh, Kenny and Vernon sometimes would cough the ball up, and this was an era, and we'll probably get into this more, but where I mean it was a very physical era, a lot of
Contact.
swallowing your whistle, and so they let a lot of contact go, and Vernon and Kenny sometimes would get just bombarded and cough the ball up. Well, in the finals against the Knicks, there was a game where it just felt like the Rockets couldn't score, and they brought in Amigo off the bench, and he hit a few little just crazy runners over Patrick Ewing, and
Yeah, I forgot about that.
and that was big for
Yeah,
sure.
he was great. Just another good role player that, yeah,
Right.
could give you a spark.
All right, Robert Ory.
Robert freaking Ory. Man,
Uh,
more rings than Michael Jordan.
More rings than Michael Jordan. 7 championship
That's
rings,
incredible.
3 teams. He's got multiple rings with 3 different teams.
Yeah, that says something. That doesn't happen by accident.
No.
Does not
Number
happen.
25. But let's get into Robert Ory a little bit.
Well, we've talked
So
about this before, but those early 90 Rocket teams, uh, we we get a good draft pick in the 92 draft, and we wanted Harold Miner,
Harold Miner, I
Big,
will freely admit it. I
Big
wanted Baby
Jordan.
Jordan on my team. I was enamored with him.
He looked great.
Yeah, he'd had a great college career at USC, and you got, there was so many Jordan comparisons that you were
Yeah,
like, we can't pass on, the next Jordan.
yeah.
Uh,
Even had a
and they
bald
took,
head.
yeah, and they took Robert Ory, and it was like, who?
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. I was like,
You know,
who is
this
this guy?
dude out of Alabama. Alabama plays football. I don't play freaking basketball.
But looking back, I remember, our small forward, today's NBA is so positionless. But back then, you really played two positions. Two of those positions. You drafted guys and got guys you could fill into those particular slots. And our small forward for years was old Bug Johnson,
Buck Johnson.
and a
He was
decent
he was
NBA.
okay.
No,
Yeah.
he wasn't. Nobody. He wasn't lighting anybody up for 20 points.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't. We needed an upgrade.
Yeah, we needed an upgrade for sure. But so again, like I said earlier, the front office, they were making good moves and they knew it. Whoever
Well,
scouted
he was
Robert Horry.
billed, or he was billed as a defender, and I think, like you said, I think he lived up to that.
But you
Um,
know what? Just as we said, Matt Bullard was a stretch four. He became a stretch four. They probably weren't expecting that, but he can knock down threes. He had a good,
yeah, I always looked at him more as a 3.
yeah, yeah, stretch three, stretch four, whatever. He could kind of play either, but yeah, he was.
Yeah,
You didn't always. He's 6'10". He's a big old dude.
he was, and
You didn't have a lot of 6'10" guys back then shooting threes. Like,
no, but here's what I was going to say about him is that if you'll recall, so like you said, drafted in 92. So 92, 93 was his rookie year. So he was a second year guy by the 93, 94 season. And a recurring problem with Robert Ory was his reluctance to shoot.
oh
He
yeah,
would he would get the ball. It's ironic that Big Shot Bob, you know, uh often didn't shoot early on.
yeah.
And and like it was like Rudy was like, look, when you get an open shot like that, we need you to take it.
Yeah,
And
he
they
would he
just
would
kept
he would
drilling that into his head, but that was an issue. And again, we're gonna get into the trade that never happened here in a second, uh but a lot of his points before he did start shooting were more on slashes to the basket where Keene would kind of dump him. That season, Dream became such a great passer,
oh yeah, for sure.
and and, and
He would
Robert
get
would just have some crazy dunks. People don't realize how athletic young Robert Ory.
oh, he was great. He was like a eh, not negatively, but he's like a poor man Scottie Pippen in some regards, like that. He kind of had that same build, maybe a little, a little taller than Pip, but uh he could do some of those things. He was so lanky but uber athletic. And yeah, man, he could dunk over anybody when he wanted to, slash into the basket. So yeah, he was great. He was just I loved Robert. And then of course we all know what he became, and he was never going to be the number one or number two person on a
But
team.
the perfect role player. And I actually did a column for the Trib today talking about role players in the NBA. I was specifically doing something on Kenrick Williams of the Thunder because he's a Waco guy and he's on the Thunder and he's a role player. And I talked about the importance of role players.
Yeah.
And I said they're not going to get their signature shoe, they're not going to be in the commercials, but they're essential. And I said, I don't think they necessarily belong in the Hall of Fame, although the Naismith Hall of Fame just popped the seal on role players because a few weeks ago they announced their new class, and Michael Cooper uh, is going into the Hall of Fame, which I think he's completely a role player. Coop was okay. He was really known for his defense, but he might have been the original 3-and-D guy. But if you're going to start putting role players in the Hall of Fame, you got to
Robert Ory.
start first ballot with Robert Ory.
You're dang right. Yeah, he should definitely go in. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Loved him. Loved him.
All right. I'm going to mention four guys together because I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on these guys.
Okay.
Chris Gent, Richard Petruska, Eric Riley, and Larry Robinson.
All right. Let me tell you what I remember about these guys. Chris Gent, you talked about the Rockets championship video. So for me,
Yes.
it's
Dude
so
got more FaceTime in the video than he did on the court.
I know. I thought the exact same thing. I was like, what was Akeem busy that day? Like, I was like, where was Dream? Why didn't?
Kenny Smith, you couldn't have got
Yeah,
Kenny.
Chris is like, well, yeah, I'll be in it. I'll be highlighted in it.
Oh, and
That's what I remembered
you
about
and
him.
we talked about, we watched the video just yesterday to kind of prepare ourselves for this
Yeah,
pod.
unbelievable. I don't remember
And yeah, there was
anything
not
about
one
on the floor.
highlight of him in the thing on the
No,
court.
no.
But beyond that, what there's this scene in the closing credits where they're showing different clips of locker room celebration, and he goes, this is great. I've been in the league 2 months. I'm a champion. Because that was the thing. Chris Gent was like a late, like playoff roster ad, you know?
The guys, the team was like, all right, here's your ring. I guess we'll give you one. All right,
Right.
so all right, Richard Petruska. All I remembered was his name. And so I had to look him up today because I couldn't remember anything about him. But here's the one beautiful factoid about Richard Petruska. You'll remember this. Again, another dude who hardly played at all, but he was the guy when they gave the Rockets the championship trophy, he dropped it and dented it. And they kept that trophy until for years until Les Alexander sold the team uh and then they're like, oh, when we get new owners, they're like, let's fix this, let's get a new trophy. But he's a knucklehead who put a dent in our. We finally get a title, a
Talk about a
championship trophy.
turnover.
Yeah. So that was his claim to fame.
Eric Riley, if I recall, was out of Michigan.
He was a
I
rookie
mean,
that year too.
rookie out of Michigan.
Obviously had a
And
different rookie
he
season
had
than
been
Sam.
good. He had been good at Michigan, but
He was
didn't
injured in the
see the
playoffs.
court much.
He wasn't even on the playoff roster because he was injured. So
Okay. And then
not my
Larry Robinson, he got some FaceTime in the I think in the 95 championship video.
I'm telling you, all
He
the
was
big guys were when they were making those videos, the our big name guys were like being interviewed by NBC and ESPN, and Larry's like, I'm available. Yeah.
but sometimes they did have some funny comments like which one of them said they were talking about Dream playing Chris Dudley.
It was Larry
And
Robinson.
yeah, Larry Robinson's
That's
like,
not your fault, Chris. It's not your
yeah,
fault.
he said he looked over at us at the bench and then we were like, it's not your fault, Chris.
I'm glad you grouped those guys together. Let's move on.
Yes, let's move on. All right. Vernon Mad Max Maxwell. And hey, Vernon's a big social media guy. He's a big
Oh,
Twitter guy. So we need to tag Mad Max in this podcast
oh,
and
that's great.
see if he'll watch it because I bet he would.
If you're watching this and you've never seen any of his I wrote this down today because it was so good. This is so good. This is one of his pinned tweets. Here's Vernon. He says, I'd like to apologize to Jazz fans that were offended by my tweets. If I knew you guys had internet in Utah, I would have never made those tweets.
he
You gotta love
trolls
him.
he trolls Jazz fans so much, and
I
it's
love it that he's 30 years later. That's awesome.
so awesome, so awesome. My favorite one that he ever did on the Jazz fans was this live look at like Utah Jazz tryouts or something, and it was all these just like slow, dumpy, overweight white guys like just bricking shots, looking like Philip Seymour Hoffman out there, just plank.
Oh, it's awesome.
Uh, but Mad Max, man, uh,
All right, after Akeem.
really, really underrated, I think,
Oh, sure.
career for
Yeah.
sure.
So after
Um,
Akeem, he was my second favorite player on that team. Easy. And I loved all those guys, but dude, I just loved him. He tough as nails. He might be the best purchase that the Rockets ever made. Do you remember how they got him? They didn't draft him and they didn't trade for him. In 1990, they bought his contract from San Antonio for $50,000.
wow. And
Thanks,
then he later
Spurs.
beat the Spurs on a last game winning shot that season, that 93-94 season during the run, right?
Yeah,
During the 15-0 run.
that's right.
And you and I were watching. I want to say you and I were watching that game. I would have been at college, but uh here's what I remember. I must have been home. Um and I did come home sometime. It might have been, maybe it
For
was around
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving or something. But we were watching it. He hit that crazy shot, off balance,
Yeah.
little, probably 19-footer or something. And I picked you up and was jumping around with you, and I think you hit your hand on the ceiling fan, or was it vice versa? I don't
That probably happened.
know.
Yeah, that probably happened.
But uh, he just had such confidence. Uh, he had sort of a wide base on his 3-pointers, but man, he could light it up. And
Well, he was a super streaky shooter. He could miss 8 in a row, but he wasn't afraid to take 8 in a row. If he was 0-8, he didn't have a problem being 0-9. But man, if he caught fire, I mean, he was hard to stop. I mean, he was just,
mm-hmm,
again, and we'll talk about it later, but he's just like John Stark, super streaky shooting guard. But he was one of those guys, and I think you said it earlier. He just had this irrational confidence of, I can guard Jordan, and he did. And
mm-hmm,
Rockets fans, diehard Rockets fans, will still say today that he was one of the few guys that gave Jordan problems on both ends. He could guard him and he could score on him too. Now, was he a hothead? Yeah. Was there a good chance that at any time he might get two techs and get thrown out of the game or punch somebody? Yes. Was there an off chance that he might like punch a fan? Sometimes.
yeah.
Usually,
Now there was a story behind that. I don't know how deep.
I know, but
I don't know how deep we want to get into
we
that.
don't have to
We
get
don't
into
really
that.
actually I don't blame him for what happened
No,
there.
no, of course not. But he's one of those guys. Just he wasn't as crazy as like Dennis Rodman or somebody like that. But he definitely teetered on the edge. That's why they called him Mad Max.
Yeah. But you're right. He could really fill it up. I want to say he had a 50-point game in the NBA.
I think he did. Well, he set a record. It might have been just a franchise record, or maybe at the time it was an NBA record. He scored like 30 points in a quarter one time. In one of those, not that same season. I think it was a year or two
Yeah,
before.
George Gervin had for a long time had the record for points in a quarter, and I want to say it was 33. But
Okay.
I think that since has
It
been
might have been
broken.
maybe it was a franchise record, but he could
I
fill
think
it.
Klay Thompson has the record now. But um,
Well, but here's what I'd say about Mad Max. Last thing, if Hakeem Olajuwon was the foundation that the Rockets were built upon, then I think Vernon was maybe like the heart and soul of that team. Just the passion. Obviously you don't win anything without your
and
foundation.
maybe the mouthpiece, you know.
Yeah, he was mouthy.
Well, no, but what I mean is in a good way. Because if you go back and again and you listen to a lot of the videos that had some of the behind the scenes locker room stuff, and it's Vernon that's
Oh,
going,
he'd fire everybody up. Yeah,
it's Vernon that's going, hey, we got to do it together, like Rudy
yeah,
said, we got to do it together. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. He's
so
more vocal than Hakeem.
yes, yes, and
We don't
uh,
win that. We don't win that title without Vernon Maxwell.
no, and we're gonna get into the playoffs later, but to me, I mean, give him all the game balls for game 3 of the Phoenix series
Oh
because,
yeah,
uh, I mean, that was the turnaround. I mean, it's all on Vernon Maxwell because he went off in that game.
loved him.
All right. His backcourt mate, Kenny Smith.
Good old Kenny. He was not the Jet back then. Nobody called him
No,
the Jet.
I remember when he was on TNT later, and they would always call him Kenny the Jet, and I was like, what?
Where'd that come
Because
from?
we never called him the
I
Jet.
think the best thing that happened to his career was the NBA on TNT, or maybe it was winning the two titles that got him that because it's just kind of funny. Because he was
Yeah,
not.
but let's not hate on Kenny.
No, 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 no. Absolutely not. I love him. He was great. Uh, very good point guard. A good point guard. But it's not like he was a star or anything like that. He wasn't like
No, but and he
Shaq.
had that squirrely little shot.
Yeah, it
Uh
was almost like a sidewinder kind of.
yeah, it had a weird spin on it,
Yeah.
but another guy who could get really hot, another guy
Yeah,
that
he could.
hits a lot of big shots,
He did. He did. He absolutely
including
did.
including in the 95 playoff run, which we're
And you know what?
not talking about today,
No,
but
not well, that'll be another podcast.
exactly.
But even he wasn't a big guy, probably 6'3", I bet, but man, he could get up and dunk, and he was in a dunk contest, wasn't
Dunk
he?
contest. He was in the 3-point and the dunk contest. So
Same year?
I know, but he
But
was
he could do it
one of
both.
the few guys to do
Yeah.
that back then.
No, he was great. I loved Kenny. I'm not hating on Kenny, but um yeah, he's another one of those guys, real smart, North Carolina dude. He can
Yeah,
handle the ball.
and also a New Yorker and had the New York swagger, you
Yeah, he
know.
did. He did.
He
Hmm.
he grew up playing, on those playgrounds with those point guards that all came out of uh that area. And if you could play in New York, you could play anywhere. And
I will say this. We,
um,
we we touched on this earlier though. Even as our starting point guard, though, there were times where he would either hit a shooting lull or maybe he was just not carrying the ball well, maybe some turnovers or whatever. And Rudy was not afraid to sit him down and like, hey, Sam Cassell, you're finishing the fourth quarter. Or Scotty Brooks, you're finishing the fourth quarter.
true, but he still had his share of big moments. He was still on the court plenty of times late in
Oh
games,
yeah, definitely.
and his quickness is probably underrated. He was really quick. He could get up and down the court. Um, and look, it's a lost art today, but dude knew how to throw a post entry pass into Dream. And yeah, did Akeem help make Kenny Smith? Sure, he did. But
You know what? I think that he definitely hit a lot of big shots. I kind of think that he had a better playoff run in 95 than he did in 94,
that's probably fair.
particularly in the finals. But yeah, he was a huge part of those teams. I loved having him on those teams. But yeah, I think he struggled a little bit against Derek Harper in the finals and those guys till maybe game seven. But um, yeah, I'm not trying to knock him or anything. I was, love the dude. Glad he was on our team.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like I may have more appreciation for Kenny than
I
you
love
do.
Kenny. Hey, if let me say this and we'll move on. If there's a tinge of not animosity, but whatever towards Kenny, it's probably because anytime I've seen him over the years on NBA and TNT, he's always kind of a little edgy towards the Rockets. And
Yeah, but that's probably him not wanting to look real like he's favoring, his old
well, he
team.
doesn't because he never, he always seems to say more negative things about them, at least in years past, maybe not so much recently, but
I I love that show, and I think he and Kenny and Charles and Shaq do a really great job.
for sure, of course I do.
So yeah. Yeah, let's move on. Otis Thorpe.
OT. All right, here's the first thing I think about him, other than his rebounding. Well, this is part of it. Every time Otis Thorpe would catch a rebound, he had these massive hands, and the basketball looked like a softball in his hand. He would grab a
Like
rebound
an
and just start,
orange.
yeah,
Yeah.
just like an orange. Yeah, he just started swinging it around like that. The dude was jacked. Like he had those massive shoulders, and yeah, I mean, just a big old dude. I mean, prototypical power forward
I
for
feel
the
like we've
time.
said this about three or four guys already, but another guy whose career is probably underrated, you know?
He was only an all-star one time. I remember that, and it wasn't even that year. I think it was 92 that he was an all-star. Um,
He was a good defender.
Good defense, not a good shooter. He was not the guy you wanted on the free throw line, like not a good free throw shooter.
Yeah,
Maybe that had something to do with the big hands.
and you'll having just watched that championship video, there's two or three shots in there where they were talking about what times the Rockets had offensive lulls, and it was always Otis Thorpe throwing up some really bad brick from about 6 feet away from the basket. I mean, he could take some bad shots.
Well, he'd take a shot from 6 feet away and just hit glass, and that was it. And you're
Yeah.
like, you're like,
But he and Akeem, particularly that season, um, had such a chemistry. And like we said, Dream really took off as a passer. And there was so many times where, they double team Akeem and he just flip it to OT. And Otis, one-handed dunks he had all
oh
day.
yeah, you weren't stopping that. I mean, and you could pencil, I mean, you couldn't pencil. You could permanent ink him in every night for 10 and 10, easy. He's a walking double double uh,
Yeah.
every night. So you knew,
Pretty.
yeah, and I forgot this too until I looked it up. But he wasn't going to miss any games. Like he didn't. He had like a consecutive games record for a while there, I think.
Well,
Or
AC Green had that
well,
record,
no, he
but
didn't have a record, but he had like
like
he
a
had like
run, a
some,
streak.
yeah, he had like 500 something straight games where he played.
That's yeah.
Yeah,
Load management wasn't in Otis Thorpe's vocabulary.
no, and he was great. And like you could count on that dude. You could count on him.
OT, you mentioned Vernon Maxwell being maybe the second best. I mean, to me, uh, Otis had more skins on the wall at that point. He had having been an all star. He was probably the guy. If people were talking about the Rockets, they would have looked at him as the second best player.
Mhm.
But and I'm going to get into it a little bit later when we just talk about kind of the scope of this team. But um, it says something. There really has not ever been a champion quite like the 93-94 Houston Rockets in terms
Yeah, I
of
think you're right.
talent, because uh,
We had
this
one All
wasn't,
Star.
yeah, one All-Star. This wasn't a team of a bunch of Hall of Famers,
All right, we'll get into that later.
All right.
OT, I loved OT. OT was great. It
Yes.
was tough
All
to
right.
trade him back.
Let's talk about Akeem, the Dream, Olajuwon. Yes, we love him. Uh, Dream. I mean, you mentioned it. That was your introduction to the Rockets.
I don't know what you can say about him that hasn't already been said.
We
Here's one
could
thing I did
we
think
could do a 6-part mini series on Akeem, just talking about him all day.
we probably should. If you're watching this, me and Brice got to meet him. We waited.
I've met him a couple times, 2 or 3 times.
Well, that first time, it was when his biography came out. We drove down to Houston at a book signing, waited in
What a
line.
day that was.
It was awesome. It was long. It was awesome. There was no phones to play with while we waited in line for hours and hours and hours. But
We
we,
were inside though,
yeah, that's
and
true.
we had gotten there pretty early in the day, and so we were in probably the top, I would say, third to 25% of the line. Um, and if you'll recall, we like made friends with all the people in the line with us because we were sitting there with them all day. We were like hearing their stories and
Yeah, it was
finding
fun.
out about them as a Rockets
And
fan.
and long before, obviously, long before smartphones and easy pictures and selfies, but thank God we brought a camera because we each have a picture with him, or at least getting, I think the picture, I still have this picture. It's the back of me and the front of him signing the book. And I remember specifically shaking his hand, which not everybody was doing when they went up there, but I remember sticking my hand out and I said, "It's an honor to meet you." And he kind of gave me a little smile, like, like, "Thank you." And he shook my
Well,
hand.
I had actually written uh,
I
a
remember.
little report or whatever, a story about you and I and our journey as Rocket fans and how it really revolved around Akeem um
He still
and
got that in his filing cabinet, I'm sure.
I gave it to him. Who knows? It probably went in the trash, uh, but yeah. And then here's what else I remember about that book signing is, um, well, a couple things. After we were just on cloud nine, meeting him, shaking his hand, uh, and then we now we're out of line and we're gonna make our way out of the bookstore, but we turned back to look at him, and we're just like, you know, and he looked over there and he goes, "Thanks, guys."
I forgot that.
and and then I'll never forget going outside, and the line by then had snaked down
Uh,
the
a mile
sidewalk,
long.
and there was this kid standing there, and I gave him my book, and I said, "We met Akeem." I said, "Here, you want to touch it?" Because his signature was there, and the kid touched it and he smeared it. So
Are you
my
kidding?
well, that was my fault for letting the kid touch
Oh,
it. But
big
to
dummy. I
me,
still
to
have mine. It's
me,
clear as day.
it wasn't about the signature. It was about the experience and
Yeah, it was
meeting a
awesome.
team.
It
And
was
of
great.
course, obviously I went into sports journalism, and I was there when he got inducted into Texas Sports Hall of Fame, got to interview him again. And, so
All right, well, let's go
that was
back to that season. Let's go back to that season. I was kind of recollecting on this earlier. Obviously he got accolades in that year, of course, and he was huge. But I really kind of felt like it still took like the general public years. Like I feel like it took till after he retired for him to really get the recognition that he should have got way back then. Obviously he was an all-star and people knew who he was, but he probably wasn't as marketable as some of those other guys. He was a
this was a
freshman.
time when, you know, there weren't foreign guys all
No.
over the league like
Well,
there
and,
were.
and they weren't going to be the face of the league.
Right. Now we have Giannis, and we have Joker, and we have Luca, and we
Yeah.
have all these guys that and Americans have just embraced them and adopted them. And Dirk Nowitzki is the greatest Maverick of all time, or maybe he'll be passed by Luca. Maybe he already has, but uh and so you got all these foreign guys now that people are not afraid to cheer for, but Akeem was really the first.
Yeah, he really
And
was.
and
I think he was the first, well, he had to have been the first foreign-born
born
MVP, right?
born number one pick. Yeah, that's true.
But so that I felt like that year, we knew it all along. Like we'd been telling people for years, we're like, this dude is amazing. He's one of the second best players in the league or whatever.
I can remember going to college and talking about the Dream Shake, and people looking at me like I had two heads, and they were like, "What's the Dream Shake? Dream Shake?" But they knew about Larry Bird, they knew about Magic, they didn't know about Dream.
Dude,
And
well, I it was so that year it was so he put everybody on notice. I think it was undeniable that year. Obviously he was an all-star, defensive player of the year, most valuable player of the regular season, MVP of the finals, wins the
mhm.
title. The only thing, and this is so nitpicky, but the only thing I remember about that year, like I wanted him to sweep the table. I wanted him to win the MVP award at the All-Star game. I remember watching that game because I was thinking, how you can win it. And freaking Scottie Pippen won it. And those All-Star games, he was never good in those anyways. Those were not his kind of games. Like that's not where he shined.
Right, and he was a guy that in that setting was probably more likely to defer. But
Yeah. And that didn't mean, that didn't make any kind of blip on that
best
year.
shot blocker in NBA history,
Yeah.
and um, would just tattoo the ball sometimes, would just send it to third row. Obviously he learned how to try to, keep it in bounds for his teammates and stuff, but man, he could just swat it. Um,
Well, I mean, what other
that
people
to me
love?
is the defining image of the Portland series is
Oh yeah, knocking those.
him getting ripped at half court by Rod Strickland, and Rod Strickland had like a full head of steam, and Akeem, there was a chase down block long before LeBron James. He chased him down and just threw it into the third row, man. That
He did
block
the
was
same thing against Kevin Johnson. Um, so he was in his 8th year that season. And
and we had grown up with him.
oh yeah, he went to school, University of Houston, and he was all Houston, and we'd been watching him that whole time, and what unless people really study his career, what they wouldn't know is that those first 5 or 6 years, that was a bad dude. He got in so many fights. Excuse me. He got thrown out of so many games for punching somebody who was messing with him. He was ferocious, and
Yeah, he had a temper, and it probably wasn't until after he sort of rededicated himself to his, Muslim religion that he sort of settled down some.
yeah, and that you can't help but think it must have played some kind of part on his professional career because he was a different player. He was a different dude. He was still just as talented, but he could channel it all. He wasn't going to get into a fight or anything like that, and more or less. And again, at that point, he's an 8-year vet, respected by all these players. And the players know how good he is, but that year, it just all came together. It was just a perfect storm of everything coming together and him
Yeah, and he
being,
was at the peak of his powers.
yeah,
He uh as as great, you can make a case best defensive center ever. Certainly you can make that case. Uh but his moves had moves, I mean,
incredible.
the offensive game, and certainly he refined it and worked on it, and we know, you and I know his story and how he, used to play in the summers at the Fondie Rec Center against Moses Malone. That's really a lot of where his game was built. But but the moves, I mean, we saw it on a nightly basis, and you just, when he did that dream shake and the fadeaway, it was money. You just, if he missed it, you were surprised.
Yeah. And there were so many people uh, that even, well, refs would call him for traveling because he moved too quick. And they were like, well, that had to have been a travel. And then he'd stop and he'd explain it to him like, no, this is what I did.
Show him the footwork. His
Yeah.
footwork was unreal. His game was really developed in Nigeria on handball, team handball, and a lot of his moves kind of came from that. But yeah, I mean, he to me he invented stuff like nobody had a move like that dream shake. I remember Sports Illustrated once in the 90s did this story on the best or best signature moves, and they had the sky hook, and they had like Jordan's fadeaway, and they had all these things, and they named the dream shake the best signature move.
Ah, that's
And
awesome.
I was like, yeah, yeah, you better name it. You better know.
Well, I just remember that was one of the greatest individual seasons ever in the history of the league. Uh,
Yeah,
I mean, you nowadays stats are a
dude
little.
had not necessarily that season, but dude had two quadruple doubles in his career.
Yeah,
You
incredible.
know, he's one of four guys to have a quad. He's the only guy to have two of them. Ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. I mean, and nowadays when we see a guy, go baseline and fake and then go back the other way with a jump hook or something, I mean, every time you think of Dream because he was the first guy who ever pulled that
Well,
move
that's why
off.
I say I think people now he was 20 years ahead of his time.
Well, and think of all the guys, including Kobe, who went to Dream in
Yeah.
the off season and
Teach
essentially went
me.
went through Dream School.
Yeah.
So it's like,
LeBron. I think LeBron
show
went
me,
there
yeah,
too.
show me your move. Show me, teach me something.
Mhm.
He became a mentor to the next generation of players.
Yeah, I love it. And he's another guy who still does a lot of stuff with the Rockets, kind of like an ambassador, which I love that. I love that.
Oh, and to me, no offense to Earl Campbell and Nolan Ryan and Craig Biggio and Jeff Bagwell and Jose Altuve. And I wrote a column recently in the last year or two where I declared Jose Altuve now the greatest Astro ever. Uh, when you're talking about the Mount Rushmore of Houston sports, it starts with Akeem Olajuwon.
Has to. He brought the first title to Houston.
Yeah,
Has to.
and yeah, he's the guy. He's the man, and we love him. We could, like I said, do another 2 hours just sitting here talking about our best dream memories, but we've alluded to it a few times. Let's discuss the trade that never was. So in February of that 94 season, the Rockets decided to send Robert Horry and Matt Bullard to the Pistons for Sean Elliott. So here's a big what if. How does the fate of the Rockets and even the NBA change if Sean Elliott does not fail a physical?
That's a great question. I got on a kick a couple months ago where I would just go down the rabbit hole on YouTube and watching old NBA games, from the 80s and 90s. And I ended up watching a number of games, not all of them, but most of them were on there from the 95 playoff run, Rockets against the Spurs in the 95 Western Conference Finals. And, stuff comes back to you when you watch that. You're like, oh, I remember that guy. I remember that guy. And Sean Elliott was on that team. And I forgot just how good he was. Like, he was awesome. Uber athlete. Um,
Mid
just
range was tough in the mid
yeah, could
range.
jump out of the gym. Good defensive, athletic wing player. So yeah.
Certainly more of a proven scorer at
Oh
that point
yeah, definitely
than
the behind David Robinson, the number two scorer on the Spurs. He became. We were trying to get him. He was on Detroit.
Pistons. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think he would have been awesome for us. Obviously, he would have given us a huge number, another scoring punch, and you could almost make the argument that we made the trade for the same dude next year when we got Clyde. I mean, they were very similar, is what I'm saying. They were similar type guys. Not the same, but we almost went after the same type. We went after the same type.
See, I would not put them in the same boat. To me, Clyde way more established
Well, he
than
was absolutely, and we
and more of
home
an
run with
open
him.
open court guy. But Elliott was a proven scorer as a small forward, and so we talked about the start that the Rockets got off on and how everything was sunshine and rainbows. They're 22-1. They're playing unreal. So if you think about that, you think about why would you even mess with that?
I thought about that. I thought about the chemistry you're messing
But
with.
Um, but here's it, it speaks to the fact that they did go through some lulls
Yeah.
after that 22-1 start, and there was concern about Robert's reluctance to shoot. And what is this guy ever going to get it? Is he ever going to figure it out? Is he ever going to be there was worries that he might even be like an offensive liability just because he, was not shooting it when he was open. And then Bullard was kind of just the throw in piece
Yeah.
to probably make it all work. Um, and so they make the trade, and I remember not being a fan of it
Oh, I
because
wasn't. No, no.
at
Yeah, I
that
can see
point I was
where you're
all
going.
in on Robert,
Yeah.
and I saw the potential by then. I was like, no, we made the right move. Forget Harold Miner.
To
He
me,
could let Harold Miner go win a couple of dunk contests. That's the highlight of his career. But
there was.
uh,
I
I,
was just
I
mad.
was not on board with the Elliott
No,
trade.
to me the bigger thing was, I might not have been sure of Robert at that point, but I was thinking, why would you mess up this team now in February when we're good enough to win it? Yeah, I was like, that's just it can't be good. Just it can't be good.
And so he fails the physical. I want to say, was it a kidney
Yeah,
thing?
because he ended up having, I think he ended up having a kidney transplant at some point.
Yeah, and so there was concerns about his long-term health, and
Hey, you know what? For Sean Elliott, unless he got traded, he may not have ever found that out until maybe it's too late. So maybe one of those things was like a blessing in disguise for everybody.
it's a good point. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but that's an excellent point.
All right, so here's what I
Um,
thought of. I don't know if we still win the title in '94 with Sean and without those guys. I don't know if we
I
do.
agree.
I
I
don't know.
agree
I
because
don't-
Robert, he did end up after that uh being more like, oh, okay, they're going to trade me if I don't shoot. I guess I better shoot. But
Yeah.
beyond that, he became such an important guy, cutting to the basket when Dream would be double teamed, and
Hmm.
just he had dunks that were authoritative and sent a message.
Yeah.
Uh, I believe he had the first points of the NBA Finals on one of those dunks
Okay.
in Game One.
You might be right.
Um,
All right, I thought about this too. So, we're talking about that '94 season, but how it could change things for other teams too. If that trade goes through and we get Sean Elliott in '94, fast forward a few years, is he still on the Spurs in '99? Probably not.
I was
And
going to say the Memorial Day miracle never happens.
there you go. Do they win the title
Yeah,
in '99?
absolutely. Because it's like the butterfly effect. I
Yeah.
mean, it changes the course of everything.
So
Uh,
again, you're welcome, Spurs fans.
exactly. And like I said, I'm glad it didn't work out. I'm glad he failed the physical. Uh, but here's the thing, and this was talked about at the time. Like when you're traded, that doesn't happen where all of a sudden you're like, okay, void.
Oh
We're
yeah,
saying,
you're right. That was
and think about just how awkward it was, but B, it could have been. Um,
yeah.
and I think Rudy was masterful in welcoming those guys back in because it was clearly a weird situation,
Oh yeah.
and
They could have
going,
sulked the rest of the year.
yeah, and finding, embracing them and saying, no, we do want you here. Uh, and like I said, I think it was a wake up call for Robert. And um, after that, he just became a little more of a gunslinger. He's
Yeah.
like, okay, I'll shoot.
I think
Don't trade
he
me.
he he had said as much in interviews that I've seen with him. Like you see an interview with him and he says that. He's like, fine, I'll pull the trigger. So yeah, it's a testimony definitely to our coaching staff, Rudy for pulling it all together. Those guys, even Robert being just a second year player, showing some maturity to be like, not letting it affect them negatively for the rest of the year, but turning it into fuel to play better.
Absolutely. So they pull it together. They have a great season. They win the Midwest division. That was what that division was back
I miss
then.
them. I miss that. I miss it. It meant something back then. Doesn't mean
Yeah,
anything now.
they win the division, and they end up as the 2 seed behind the Nemesis, those
Mhm.
Seattle Supersonics. Um, so going to the playoffs, uh, we had good feelings
Yeah,
about this team, um, and yet we had, I think, anxiety probably about the Sonics maybe down the road.
yeah,
Um, So they get the Blazers in the first round. Of course, that was a Portland team that a few years before that had made back-to-back finals against the Pistons and then against the Bulls. Clyde the Glide, Terry
not back
Porter.
to back, not back to 90 and 92.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, because
91.
91 was the Lakers.
Yeah, but
You're
yeah,
right.
tough team.
Tough team. Jerome Kersey, um, Buck Williams, Kevin Duckworth, that whole group.
Here's what I thought of when that series started. You could tell they were at the end of an era for that team. They had their
Yeah,
run.
Rod Strickland had joined them by then.
Okay. Yeah, I mean they were
So
a
I don't know
great.
if I don't know if Terry Porter was still around, but
I don't know. I can't remember, but I just remember, they never got over the hump and won the title, but they were an awesome team for a good stretch of years, 4 or 5 years. But you could tell they were kind of at the end of their run while we were beginning ours. The end of a little era for them. That's what I remember from that series. Then, of course, you mentioned it earlier, Dream going off on their on their centers. They didn't have anybody
yeah,
who could
poor
even.
Chris Dudley. He was uh, a chalk outline out there.
Yeah,
um,
and you could tell something special was kicking off. Like,
later in the next round, it was Joe Klein's turn, but
that's right.
yeah, but Chris Dudley, yeah, he got abused.
I think, if I remember correctly, I think they fired Rick Adelman after that. I think that was his last season with Portland, if I
Could
remember
have
correctly.
been. He later became Rockets coach.
Yeah.
Um, like I said, the sort of resounding memory from that game or that series was just that block on Rod Strickland.
Mm.
That sticks out to me as, I mean, that's on Akeem's career highlight tape.
Oh, definitely. It's awesome. Look it
That was
up.
one of those all time blocks. So they're feeling good. They go into the second round and they get the Phoenix Suns. Charles
Mhm.
Barkley, KJ, Dan Marley. This is the defending Western Conference champions. They had
Yeah.
made the finals in '93, had a really good team.
Yeah.
Uh, Lost to an excellent Bulls team. Um, there's a lot to unpack from this series, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. There was. That was really all right. So here's what I remember about that. That was in May, when that series started. And in May of 1994, I was at stinking YMCA camp, Camp Cullen, training to be a camp counselor and a lifeguard. And I didn't get to watch any of those games. I remember watching game 7. I was home for that, but I didn't get to watch any of those first 6 games. Obviously we didn't have cell phones back then. We didn't even have a TV there at that stinking camp that I could go watch it. So the only way that I could keep up with what was going on with that series was they would get the paper there. They would get the Chronicle there, somebody, and they'd bring it to the cafeteria. So every morning at breakfast, I'd run. I'd be the first person to get that paper and be like, all right, what was last night's score? And I remember after game 1, like, oh, they lost. That sucks, and up by 18 points. Then we lose the game. All right, we can rebound from this. And then that game 2, I remember getting the paper, Houston Chronicle, front page, Choke City. Uh, and I'm like, okay, this is just.
Yeah, I okay. So, uh, yes, let's back up because, like I said, there's a lot to unpack. Like you said, you were a camp counselor that summer. I also became a camp counselor that
You
summer.
weren't there yet.
No, I wasn't. That's where I'm getting to. I was at a sister camp later on of the camp that you were at.
Well, I actually
Um,
went to your camp for training and then they moved me, but I was at
okay,
that.
well, whatever. But yeah, we were not at the same camp when during the
Yeah.
summertime.
No, no.
But OBU, where I went to school, got out a little bit later than most colleges, and so in May of that year during the Phoenix series, I was still in college, and uh, you want to say vividly remember those games? Oh yeah, I mean, uh, the lowest point of my sports fandom. I mean, there's no question about it, and you have to understand people that don't really realize Houston sports history to that point. You know, the Oilers, not making a Super Bowl because there was no instant replay, against the Steelers.
Buffalo.
Well, yeah, that I was going to get to that, but like the Astros had, big losses, including '86 against the Mets, uh, who go on to win the World Series. Um, but yes, the year before against Buffalo, um, the Oilers have this great team. They have this, 38-3 lead and they blow it. And, it's just an all time collapse. And so Houston was gaining this reputation as, this heartbreak town,
Mhm.
and, um, and so watching in my on campus apartment there in Shawnee, Oklahoma, I mean, you mentioned it. They get off to this great lead, game one, blow it in the fourth quarter. And it was just like, oh, game two, they're playing even better. And it's like, okay, they're going to bounce back. It's going to be 1-1. We're going to be okay. Just let's get our split. Let's move on. And fourth quarter, it just comes unraveled. And I'm feeling like somebody's just stabbing me, like with 1,000 little knives. And people who know me know this story. It has become a very big joke. But as I was watching that championship video yesterday, it all sort of like came back to me just how low I felt at that time, because here we had all this, the team was going up and up and up, and we're believing, we're like, yeah, they look like a champion. They're playing well. And then, Phoenix just uh kicked us in the gut. And so I turned off the television. I went outside and I was just like, it was one of those things where like you've just been in a car accident and you don't know, you're like in a blur and you're like, what's going on? And I didn't know how to react. And I just saw this little sapling there, this little miniature tree that was just in the infancy of its life. And I just was like, tree, and I just went and tackled it like a form tackle, and the tree kind of bent over, and then it like slowly went back up. And then I just like found some place and I just stormed off and I sat by a fence and I was just like fuming, and this guy had seen all this unfold and he walked over, and I think he figured somebody had died. And he comes over and he's like, dude, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, rockets lost. And I felt like such an idiot in that moment. And then of course, uh, I went back up to the room eventually, and uh, I had all my Rockets posters all over the wall, and I took out bed sheets and I thumbtacked bed sheets over top of the posters, and all my roommates. I had lived with three other guys, and they were like, "Oh, so you're not a fan anymore, huh?" And I was like, "No, it just hurts too much to look at."
Golly. Well, maybe
I mean, it was the lowest I'd ever been as a sports fan, and I remember after the Buffalo loss with the Oilers, I had gone to sleep at like 4 o'clock that day because after that game, because I was just like,
It was
I
terrible.
didn't want to face the world anymore.
Mm-mm.
But and like you said, so then uh it wasn't just the Chronicle. Back then the Houston Post existed too.
Yeah, yeah,
Both
yeah.
newspapers ran the same headline in a fit of copy editing genius, choke city, and
I
I
thought that
mean
was so disgraceful.
it was disgraceful, but it was accurate, it was accurate. uh and I'm not going to put it on the newspapers for fueling their fire to get back in it, uh but that's what reporter's job is, to just tell the story. And and here Houston, these were two just epic losses in a row in the almost the exact same fashion.
Um,
um and watching the video now, you just watch it, and you just want to punch Charles Barkley, because
well, yeah,
yeah, he was like, nobody out there wants to shoot, we just and he was talking about sweeping the
that was the
Rockets.
thing about Phoenix. You play these different teams in the playoffs, and when you're playing against Portland, you're like, okay, whatever, there's Portland. But Phoenix, they were a very unlikable team, at least for us. Like, yeah, Danny Ainge.
No, Danny Ainge for sure.
Oh,
He
I
was
mean,
extremely unlikable.
but they were all cocky. Barkley and all those guys. It was just so smug, and it was easy to hate those guys, which made it even worse.
And they weren't tough defensively, not really.
No, no.
Uh, and
They were one of
so
those teams that could get hot. They were a good 3-point shooting team,
they
especially.
were
And
they had weapons. There's no question they had a lot of weapons
yeah,
with KJ and Barkley and Marley and all those guys. AC Green might have been on their team by then. But that was what was so frustrating about it, was like, we can beat these guys. We
um,
could beat them. Yeah, they went to the finals. So what? Uh, so that's where it was after two games. Choke City, the world is falling. The sky is falling. Everybody's against them. We were still fans, obviously. Like you said, you weren't able to really watch those games, but
which probably was a good thing.
oh,
It's
trust me,
bad
you
enough
didn't
for
want to
great.
watch game one and two. I can promise you that. Uh, Game three, we touched on it earlier. Mad Max comes out. I don't have his stat line near me, but he went off, and the whole complexion of the series changed in that game. And they started playing with confidence again. They started playing like the Rockets. And of course, we know how it goes. They start building, and they get the series to a game seven. Um, it's at home. We didn't hit on this earlier, by the way. Uh, Seattle has now lost to
Right.
the Denver Nuggets in the very first 8-1 upset. And so going into that Phoenix series, we were like, dude, it's open for us. It's there. We're the favorites. We have home court advantage throughout the rest of the playoffs. Um, and they get to game seven, and and at that point, they talk about it in the video, but at that point, the confidence had flipped, and they were like, we're
Yeah.
not losing this game.
All right.
Forget it. We can get up 20 points, but we're not giving it up.
So back to that game three. I had to look it up because I was curious. Uh, Vernon had 3 points in the first half. In the second half, dude comes out guns blazing, scores 31 points in the second half, 14 to 22 from the
Ew.
field, hits a bunch of threes, just crushes them, brings them back, from the deck. Because if we go down 0-3,
No, it's over.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's no way.
put a fork in them. But yeah, that resurrected, and to me, that Phoenix series is where the championship was built.
I I'll give you that. I think
I
so.
mean, like, to
Absolutely.
me, after that, they knew that whatever happens, whatever we go through, we can dig ourselves out of it. And of course, by the end of the series, Sam Cassell's hitting big shots in game seven.
How huge was it that we had home court advantage for that?
Huge. But then again, in some genius copy editor out there comes up with Clutch City. And obviously that stuck and resonated. Yeah. Got a championship t-shirt here. So yeah, and the second title became Double Clutch,
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, Clutch City still resonates. The bear for the Rockets is named Clutch. Um, so
The
yeah,
biggest Houston Rock, the biggest Rockets fan website is
Clutch.
clutchfans.net.
Yeah, absolutely. So after that Phoenix series, I don't think the Jazz had a prayer in the Western Conference Finals.
No, not at all. We beat them 4-1. The only thing I really remember about that series, and I don't remember what game it is. I'm sure we could look it up and see. There was some game, of course, it was in Utah, and there was a clock issue. Do you remember this?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it was it's a tight game, I'm sure. It's just another reason to hate the Jazz. And the Rockets got the ball in, and I think we had the lead by like a slim margin, and we're trying to run the clock down. And the scorekeeper or whoever didn't start the clock. The announcers are like, start the clock, start the clock. Homer Rockets fans or announcers are pulling for us. But it went off for like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 seconds, and the clock wasn't moving. And we're like, come on. And of course, we end up winning this series. But that's all I remember about that Jazz Western Conference Finals.
All right, here we go. Chambers will throw it in bounds for the Utah Jazz. Karl Malone's probably going to try to muscle it, or they'll shoot the outside shot, one or the other. Chambers looking, still looking. Out it comes Hornacek. 12 on the clock. Well, start the time clock. They're not even starting the clock. They didn't even start the clock. They haven't even started the clock. They haven't yet.
Well, between the two of us and Jess Kersey, I don't know who was more flustered in that situation. He was the lead official in that particular ball game against the Jazz that night. And I just don't know how we could do anything but lose control. It was just one of those situations. There was 13 seconds to go. It came inbound, and 5 seconds, 6 seconds later, there was still 13 seconds to go. We were both extremely frustrated.
Well, I tell you what, I don't know if we were broadcasting to our audience at the time. I think we were
each other.
We were not only we were trying to get through to this timekeeper who was seated right in front of us.
They didn't even start the clock. They haven't even started the clock. They haven't yet. They haven't started the clock. Oh, something's got to give here. Can you believe this? They haven't even started the clock. We got it anyway. We got it anyway. Take it in. This ball game is over. Oh my goodness gracious. Yes. How sweet it is. The Rockets winning, and boy, that's one of the dirtiest plays I've ever seen.
Well, yeah, I had forgotten the clock issue. But yeah, I think they had some like weird things happened in Utah for sure sometimes. But they cut through the Jazz like a knife through hot butter, and
yeah, there was no way to stop us.
Like you said, it was 4-1. I actually just looked up Dream's numbers from that series: 27.8, 10.2 rebounds, 4.4 assists. In the series, a 5-game series, he had 13 steals and 23 blocks. He had 2.6 steals per game and 4.6 blocks.
All right, hadn't Mark Eaton had retired at that point, hadn't he? Probably, or maybe
probably.
Or he probably wasn't their starting center. Who was
he
their
would have been
starting
going
center?
up against the likes of, yes, let's see,
Elton Spencer,
Tom Chambers. I would have thought Thurl Bailey was still around, but it looked like Chambers was there. Obviously, Malone, Stockton, Hornacek. So Felton Spencer was probably their center.
That's what I thought. Yeah, y'all ain't stopping Akeem.
No, good luck with that. So after facing Chris Dudley, Joe Klein, and Felton Spencer in the first 3 rounds, for the finals, we get Rockets Knicks in a big man matchup for the ages with Dream versus Patrick Ewing, who, of course, Ewing at Georgetown had beaten Houston in the Final Four and had that little skin on the wall. so many people. This series is probably underappreciated as what a great series it was.
Well, because it was low scoring.
Yeah, and there was a lot of national um ugly ball is what it was called. Um
Didn't the Knicks play the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals that year?
Sounds right. Yeah.
Okay. So you know the NBA was thinking, "Oh gosh, we can't have a Houston Pacers finals. That would be terrible." So they had to have been happy that it was, these two similar teams, big markets, Houston and New York. You got the Dream Ewing matchup. So you had a lot of stuff to kind of highlight. So you would think that it'd be
Well, and the buzz around New York City at the time was huge because the Rangers, New York Rangers
right,
ice
they won,
hockey
won the
team
Stanley Cup.
was, yeah, they won the Stanley Cup with Mark Messier and that bunch. And so there was a lot of like sentiment like, dude, we're gonna get the Rangers and Rangers and the Knicks in the same year. Um what what are some of your personal favorite moments and memories from that finals?
Just the fact that you didn't want to be satisfied with getting back to the finals, but just the fact that we were there was amazing. It was just amazing. It was like the dream was coming true. You could see the dream becoming a reality. Like we really can. You think about it through the whole playoffs. Man, we got a shot. We got a shot. When you get to the finals, you're like, we actually have a real shot at winning a championship. Like this could really happen. You liked our chances. We were real similar teams. Like we matched up really well with each other. Of course, we think that Akeem is better than Patrick, and so
He
uh,
he
well,
is.
he is, but so as fans, you're thinking like, okay, we got that matchup. You're looking at each matchup, thinking like, okay, they may have the edge here, but we got the edge here, and that kind of thing. And I just remember being so excited. And the camp that I worked at was on the very edge. It was in Houston. It was in Spring, Texas, which is essentially part of Houston. And everywhere you went, people were talking Rockets. Everybody, it was just a buzz everywhere, and it was so exciting. And as fans, we're just on cloud nine. Of course, we're not wanting to have another heartache, but we felt really good about where we're at. I remember I got to watch game one. So glad we won the first game at home. That was huge. I think it set the tone for the rest of the series. Did you get to watch that?
I did see game one. So yes, let's talk about this. By June, I obviously was at the camp, by that point, Camp Cullen. And so I did not get to see every game live. Now we'll get to game seven here in a minute, but I would have quit the job had I not gotten to see game seven. I promise you.
Same. I told them that, yeah.
Yeah, there was no way I was missing game seven. But but I believe game one I did see. But here's the thing, like you and I have watched all these games multiple times since then, and so we know. I think we can confidently talk about each game. So that at that time, the NBA final format was still 2-3-2.
Tough.
Yeah. And game five to me is always a really crucial game. And so I always was in favor of 2-2-1-1-1. But at the time it was still 2-3-2. And so the Knicks were just looking for a split because in their mind, it was like, dude, we get a split, we can go home to New York and win it at home.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's to me a little dismissive of the Rockets, but the fact that they could win a road game, but they win. So the Rockets do win game one. They, like you said, they set the tone, but the Knicks come back and take game two, and you and I just watched the championship video, and you got all these Knicks fans. Boom, the Knicks win. Oh, we're gonna win it in 5, Houston.
It was that one guy. It was that one guy who I'll never forget.
Oh, the guy gets me every time. He's like, you don't get this in Houston. you only get this in New York, you know.
Like,
I mean,
they're not ready for this.
they're not ready for this.
They're not ready for this. They're not ready for this. This is where it happens. This is where you have championships. You don't get it in Houston.
I just want to punch that guy every time. And every time I go,
We gotta find
what'd you
that
say
guy.
now, dude?
Yeah. Yeah, that was
So,
rough. That was tough.
yeah, game 2, they steal home court advantage, and that was a big deal. And then, of course, game 3, it's a battle, you know, back and forth, and the Rockets are down 2 late, I want to say.
Down 2.
And of course, Akeem that season saw 10 trillion double teams. I mean, that was what teams did was, you know, we threw it down to Dream and you brought a second defender over.
Before the zone. This is before the zone.
And this is how our offense worked was Dream had learned where to look and where to find guys on the perimeter. And then, you know, we'd have open shots and sometimes maybe they'd rotate out and we'd do the one more pass, you know, and you get that open 3. But they collapse on Dream. He kicks a little pass out to Sam and Rookie just bam, nails it. Everybody was just so excited for him and obviously for the team. And boom, you know, okay, you had home court advantage. We just took it back.
Shot clock down to 6. Here is Harper. Derek Harper putting together back-to-back excellent shooting games. He now has 21 points. The Knicks lead by 2. Elijah Watt in the one-on-one coverage pops it out. Here's Cassell for 3. Sam Cassell coolly hits from downtown to give the Rockets a 1-point lead. And a timeout called by the Knicks. Sam Cassell, the rookie from Florida State, who faced the criticism following his play in game number 2, teeing it up and firing it home. The Rockets have been 1 for the last 9 from three-point land in the second half. Vernon Maxwell only 0 for 6 from downtown, but Cassell with the clutch shot. Rockets 89, Knicks 88, 28 seconds to go in the 4th.
So that was a huge win.
Oh yeah, if we lose that game, there's a good chance we do lose 4-1.
I mean, it's tough to say because, like I said, I feel like the Phoenix series taught them that they could come back from anything. But yeah, game 3 was huge. They obviously the Knicks take game 4 and game 5, and now they've got a little confidence going. They're up 3-2. They're swagger.
Don't gloss over those. Those were tough games. You know?
And the narrative of that was how physical
That's just
New York
it.
guards were being. Derek Harper was kind of killing Kenny.
Yeah. That's what I was alluding to earlier. But they were a real tough team.
Well,
even
but
if we
here's the
matched
thing.
up.
21 years.
That whole ugly ball thing, when this is what I was going to get into when we got to the finals. You talked about the Knicks being a little bit of a mirror image. Okay, but
No, we were not like that. We were not thugs.
they were thuggish, and it was after the bad boy Piston era. To me, the Knicks just sort of carried that mantle after that, and Pat Riley was just like, yes, just if they don't call it, just beat on them. And they had guys like Charles Oakley and Anthony Mason, Charles Smith, and even the guards, Derek Harper and John Starks, were very, very physical, very, very hands-on.
Yeah.
When they eliminated hand checking from the NBA finally in like the early 2000s, the first guy I thought about was Derek Harper. And I was like, well, you just got neutralized. He was probably out of the league by then. But I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
they controlled it and they were feeling good.
Well, yeah, they were super tough. I don't know if I'd call them a better defensive team that we were, but they were a tougher and more physical defensive team than we were by far.
Yes, and if you had an officiating crew that was going to call it loose, that favored the Knicks. If they were going to let
Yeah.
some contact go, that
Well,
favored.
and you know, you can go back and look at Akeem's stats. I mean, he still had a great series, but it wasn't as dominating as maybe some of the other series that playoff run, simply because I mean, you know, they double and triple team him. They, you know, they were
Yeah, and
important.
I just think if if that same game had been dropped into the early 2000s, 7 years later, whatever, like, I just think it's probably not as close because I think the Rockets were more capable of playing a free flowing
Yeah, for sure.
offensive game than the Knicks were.
Yeah, we were a much better offensive team than they were by far. We had more
Yeah,
weapons.
more weapons, just smoother in the open court. But yeah, they would beat on you for sure. And so they go into Houston game 6, and now they're up 3-2. And John Starks goes freaking off.
Yeah, I don't know that I had ever been as stressed out as at a game like that one. I got to watch that one, and man, you just, yeah, going on. And that's why I compared him to our team, you know, Vernon. He was just like Vernon. If he catches fire, he's going off, and he just went nuclear that game. I don't remember how much he finished with, but he was hitting everything.
Yeah, I was just looking at it.
And
It
you know,
looks like he had 27. He
felt
meant,
felt like 57.
yeah, it really
How much?
did.
How many in the fourth quarter? That's what I'd like to know.
Um, it's a good question.
Because it was
But
back and forth, back and forth. But hey, let's not go. Let's not. We don't have to touch on this a lot. But what game was the OJ thing? Was that game 5, 4 or 5?
it's a great question, and I'm so glad in hindsight because obviously that's what a lot of the nation remembers from the Rockets Knicks
Yeah.
series is the OJ game. I want to say it was game 5.
Well, thank God it was
I'm
a
so
Superfans.
glad I didn't see that live because what I remember and seeing the documentary and everything from it afterwards is that okay, there were times they decided to split screen it
Mm-hmm.
with the OJ chase, and then there were times maybe they just cut the game altogether and just showed the OJ chase. I would have been losing my mind. I would have been like, who cares about freaking OJ? Uh, so I'm so glad I didn't see that
Yeah.
live.
We had to mention that because that was just
Oh,
a
it was a big story.
big footnote.
I think there's a whole documentary just about that. Um, yeah, so that was part of it.
All right, but game 6.
Like I said, the ugly ball narrative, because a lot of the games were 86, 84, and you know,
Yeah.
that was a national narrative, was all these national writers calling it ugly ball, which like I said, I blame more on the Knicks because you can't watch Akeem Olajuwon and say ugly ball. I mean, you just can't.
Well, and that's not what the series looked like against Utah, Phoenix, or even Portland, you know.
Right, right. But if you let them beat on us, sure, it's going to get ugly.
All right, so let's go to the end of game 6. It's
Into
back and
game
forth,
6,
back and
to
forth.
me, I'm sorry, LeBron James, but this is the biggest block in NBA Finals history. No offense to your chase down block of Andre Iguodala, which was pretty freaking huge too, but John Starks, like you said, is unconscious, and he's got a 3 off a pick and roll to win the game. Win not the game, win the championship.
And
They could have won.
they were down by 2, and he's going for 3.
Right. And this is at the buzzer.
Not trying to
They're
tie it. He's trying to win
they're
it.
about to win 4-2 if he makes this shot, and I have no doubt that if
Yeah.
Akeem doesn't get a fingertip on that ball, it's going in because
Yeah.
Starks was unconscious, and Dream played it as well as you could play it, and just got enough of it to deflect it, and we're going to Game 7.
And I would still not be surprised to see John Starks try to win it. 7 and 6/10 seconds to go. Rockets lead by 2, and here is Starks. With a look from 3, it's tipped, and it's knocked away, and the Rockets win. The ball was tipped. It was partially blocked. Man, Elijah with the big tip. Elijah just flicked it and disrupted that shot. Well, a terrific finish here at the Summit.
I remember seeing an interview years later with Pat Riley, and somebody asked him about that. Pat Riley, genius coach, won multiple titles, Lakers and then Heat. He said that his biggest regret was on that play having Patrick Ewing be the one to set the pick on John Starks, whoever was guarding Starks at the time, probably Vernon, because it brought Akeem into the play. He said, looking back, what he should have done was put Patrick on the opposite side of the court. And if that happens, he's nowhere near that play. He's not running across the court. He was there in the mix. So, just the minorest, the smallest oversight.
That's a coach thing to say, and that's what coaches do is they go back and kick themselves over little decisions like that have big implications. But thank God Akeem was there, because
nobody else is making that play. Nobody else is making that
nobody else in maybe the history of basketball.
I agree with that.
His instincts,
and he stumbled.
We talked about how all the steals he had. No center before that had steals like Akeem. His hands were so quick, and he got just enough of it just to deflect it and ball game. Let's play.
Yeah. Well, and when he's running towards it, he stumbled right before he got there, and he recovered and still got up. And, like you said, got a finger on it. And I remember when it happened, you're just screaming, no. And when you saw the contact, I was afraid they were going to call foul or something. But then you don't hear a whistle, and then you see the ball that it's going, it's nowhere near the rim. And just the biggest sigh of relief ever. You're like,
euphoria for sure. So now we have a Game 7, and like I said, we're both working at camps, and fortunately, first of all, I think they would have made concessions for me, but there were, like, in my camp, and it's probably the same way at your camp, Mirror Lake, you had one night a week where you had like an off night or something, and my little off night just happened to fall on Game 7. And so some other counselor was watching my cabin of kids, and I went to one of those trailers there on Camp Cullen, had a TV, and sat there on the floor of that trailer watching Game 7. And obviously, again, what a lot of basketball fans probably remember about that Game 7 is as hot as Starks was in Game 6, he went completely the opposite in Game 7. I think he was like 1 of 13 or something.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yeah, but it's not what I remember about it, because I just remember it being like the ultimate coronation, because we just played our game. How Bill Worrell would say, if the left one won't get you, the right one will. I mean, we played that kind of basketball where the ball was moving, and Akeem was doing his thing, and we were, getting the one more pass, and Vernon would hit a 3, and Kenny would hit a 3, and it was like it all came together.
Yeah, I'll agree 100%. I got to watch that I was in a nurse's station. It wasn't my night off for that week, but I told them, I said, y'all figure the schedule out. I was like, I'm not watching some little snot-nosed kids this night. I'm watching the Rockets.
Like I said, I would have quit. Quit. That job didn't pay enough to really fight over,
No.
I mean, That was the biggest sports moment of my life to that point of
The
my
only TV
21 years of life.
at our camp, the only TV was in this nurse's station. So the nurse said, "Yeah, you can watch it." And there was no other Rockets fans at that camp. They were because I was so excited. There was like 4 or 5 other staff, like the director and the nurse, like they're all like, "We're gonna go watch this with you because you seem really excited about it." I was like, "Do you guys understand how big this is for the city of Houston? You know, do you
Well,
understand?"
so all the other counselors who did have off that night did watch it with me. And so we had kind of a, 5 or 6 in this little living room that were watching it. And it was glorious.
And you're right. It was everybody playing their part to perfection. It was, you couldn't
Yes.
have scripted it any better. It was still a really
And
close
in
game.
the aftermath, Akeem just sits there and kind of like soaks it all in, just sort of like looking around.
Well, let's get to where, you got your moments. You're going back and forth, back and forth. We'd get a 5 point lead, they'd come back. We'd get a 6 point lead, they'd come back. And then, but the backbreaker, Vernon
Max,
Maxwell
yeah,
hit the 3-pointer with about a minute and some change left to put us
kind of
up.
kind of off balance or sort of like fading away a little bit.
But
Yeah.
I think it was over, was it over Starks? Maybe it was over somebody else. But I remember him bumping into John Starks after he hit it.
Well, yeah, no, he kind of pushed him out of the way as he
Yeah.
starts to celebrate.
The iconic him jumping at center court and everybody mobbing him. Because at that point, there's always some point in one of those games where you know,
You
you're like,
know.
and that was the moment right there.
Oh, yes, and I was jumping around that little trailer. I probably put a hole in the floor, but and then when the game ended, I mean, I probably didn't see a lot of the post game aftermath because I had to get back to my cabin. But I'll never forget this. I mean, I'm just in this state of like euphoric bliss, almost in a state of disbelief. Did it really happen? But I knew it had, and I get back to my cabin, and my guys are all in bed, even though they really weren't asleep, and a lot of them were from Houston. These little kids, and I'll just never forget this one little kid. Like, I got into my bed and he looked over and he said, "Did they win?" And I said, "Yes." And they were like, "Yeah."
And you
And
were Santa Claus to that kid.
oh my gosh, it was
So what
again.
I remember from that is, I'm screaming the whole game and every big shot, I'm screaming, screaming. When the final buzzer sounded, uh, I started crying. I was so, that sounds ridiculous now. You're like, why would you cry over winning? But it's because we had gone through so much as fans, and I just sat there. I couldn't believe it. And just these tears just started coming out. And I remember the nurse, uh, like afterwards, she talked to me about it. She was like, "But you really love this team." I was like, "You have no idea." I
You
was
have no idea. You
but
really
then the cool thing was because my camp sat on the outskirts of Houston, all of a sudden, horns. We started hearing horns. I mean, just like a symphony of them. Like I can't even describe how many and how loud it was, even being on the
and
outskirts of Houston.
this is before the Astros. This is
Yeah, this is
Houston's
the first.
first championship in anything. They'd won the AFL back in the early 60s with the Oilers, but this was the first. And
I think I heard a player describe it before. It was kind of like a champagne cork, you know, popping out. It just,
yeah,
and like all these emotions of everybody finally being released, if we did it.
yeah, everybody at that camp was so happy for me because they knew how big of a Rockets fan I was. There was this counselor from Brazil that I became really good friends with. That summer was the summer of the World Cup in America that year, and Brazil won the World Cup. And
Big.
Hona was his name, Hona Luis de Silva. Uh, he was so happy for me with the Rockets, and I was so happy for him with Brazil. We weren't fans of each other's teams, but we kind of were for that summer. So I was like,
Cool.
"Yes, Viva Brazil!" And he was like, "Viva Rockets!" And so yeah, the aftermath. Did you go to the parade or?
No, I would have loved to have gone to the parade. The very next day after game 7, so one of my close friends that I met at my camp, was this Hispanic guy named Izzy, Isidro Dominguez, but his name was, we called him Izzy. And he was a
Which
big
we had
bass.
you and I and this guy named Micah and Izzy, we had an epic 2-on-2 basketball.
Story for another time.
Yes.
But though I do think we won, but whatever.
Yeah, sure.
So Izzy was a huge basketball fan. He wasn't necessarily a Rockets fan, but like you said, he was a friend of mine. We became friends that summer, and he was happy for me. And so that next day, that very next day, um, you're just still on cloud nine. And I was like, I gotta get a shirt. I was like, I know, that was the big thing back then. I don't know if that's still big or not, but like you wanted to get the championship paraphernalia of your team. We talked about the championship video, but we wanted the shirt. It was a big deal just to see a championship shirt. And
I had so many Rockets championship shirts. That's what I was going to say about the aftermath. The amount of gear I bought that summer. I mean, probably every weekend. That's what I was spending my, extra money on. I should have been saving it for college, but I had one more semester, one more year.
Well, that next day, I remember collecting papers. I remember getting a Chronicle and a Post because you wanted that, full color picture of Game 7 win. It's huge. And he and I went to a mall. I can't remember which mall it was, but it was in Houston, Post Oak or North Point, something like that. And Houston was not a dangerous city, but it wasn't necessarily the friendliest either. But at that time, that summer, everybody was your best friend because we were all, we did it, and everybody you ran into was a Rockets fan. Everybody was excited, and
Yeah, the whole city was on cloud nine.
oh, it was awesome, and the mall was full, and I remember going to multiple stores there, Foot Locker and whatever else, just to get different shirts, and we had no money, but I was like, whatever I have, I'm spending on Rockets.
Yeah, I got magazines, papers, shirts, hats, the dream MVP cap, you got me this cool later on piece of the Summit floor when they moved out of the Summit. And then the championship video also, did it come with the poster? I think it came with the poster. I had multiple posters. That was a poster era.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I can remember going back to college that fall and just gloriously putting up those posters and like just flaunting it, like it's real. It happened. Here it is,
You should have wrapped one around that poor little tree.
That tree survived. That tree was tough. That was a Rockets tree. That was a Rockets tree. Yeah. So just to kind of wrap it all up and tie a bow on it, 30 years later, looking back at that team, what was it about that 94 team that made it so special?
I think again, you got to start with Hakeem, height of his powers, you said earlier, and fully coming into his own, his prime. We had hit on some good draft picks. We signed some good players. I mean, it just came together. The chemistry was perfect. And I think it talked about this on that championship video of how much those guys, they cared about each other. They really were a team. They weren't just NBA players. Like these guys, they had a goal in mind and they knew they could do it together. And so that was special. I think it was special for us. It was special for Houston because you finally got the monkey off the back, right? Of the first pro sports team in the city to ever win a title. So that was huge. And I think for us personally, it was so special because, because they won, it's like we won. I think
we had been through the journey with them.
Yes. I think my identity was really wrapped up in them, maybe to an unhealthy degree. But you could relate a little bit. You could relate like being the underdog, being the underdog for so long. And you can feel like you're the underdog in a bunch of things. And when they finally won and finally pulled off, and you felt like they really did it the right way too. They weren't uh they weren't a thuggish team. They weren't a team of a bunch of Hall of Famers like the Lakers or the Celtics. You got the MVP of the league, but then you got a bunch of other just hard-nosed, tough guys. Uh, that made it special. That was huge.
Was. And that was what I was going to mention was, to me, there's never been a more unique NBA champion than that team. Because I think later on, the 2004 Pistons won a championship without really, a bunch of Hall of Famers on their team. They did have multiple All-Stars, but it wasn't even their All-Stars. I mean, Chauncey Billups kind of came into his own and became Mr. Big Shot. Ben Wallace was Defensive Player of the Year, not a big scorer. But they were kind of a little bit more of a role player team, and about the only one I would ever really compare to the Rockets in that regard. But this was one transcendent superstar with this constellation of role players around him. And we hadn't seen that before. Those Pistons teams, okay, you had Isaiah, but you also had Joe Dumars. Yeah. So like you said, Otis Thorpe only made one All-Star team.
And it wasn't even that year.
Kenny wasn't an All-Star. Vernon, we talked about how underappreciated these guys are, but this was a team of role players who embraced their role, and a coach who was this hard scrabble, coach who communicated so well with them, and everybody and that was the word that kept coming across in the championship video was together, together, together. And to me, it was Dream figuring out that, look, I can't carry all this load myself. I've got to pass it out. I've got to trust these guys. And the more trust he put into them, the more they delivered. And so, yeah, man, it was such a unique champion, and it was so fun for us as fans. And when we do part 2, I can't believe we've done 2.5 hours on this, but when we do part 2 for the 95 team, because we've got to, we'll get into some more stuff, like just validating it with the next year's championship. But a lot of freaking critics will say, well, Jordan wasn't around. Well, he was around for the second one, first of all. But and who cares? You can't, it's not the Rockets' fault that Jordan decided to retire. And like you said, 5-1 against them those 3 years that they won the first 3 championships. So
people seem to not think about this either, as if Jordan being there, we wouldn't have still got to the finals. We would have still gotten to the finals.
We would have still gotten to the finals, and bring it on. I would have freaking loved to see the Bulls and the NBA would have loved to see Dream versus Jordan.
I tell Bulls fans all the time, I'm like, look, the best thing that ever happened to Michael Jordan's legacy was him retiring. Because if he sticks around, he's losing one of those. If he goes to the final, if they go to the finals in 94 or 95, he's losing at least one of those, guaranteed.
Yeah, and there's so much of that, like, Jordan was just spent. Obviously, his dad had been murdered, and so there's that's a whole nother story. But he was burnt out. So, like you said, could they have even gotten there 4 years in a row?
I mean,
they had the talent, they had the coach, and they had I'll give Jordan, he's the GOAT. I mean, he's the greatest. He's, he'd rip your heart out to win. But at that point, I don't think he had it in him. and the Rockets obviously took advantage, but you know, they're not going to apologize because he wasn't around. And it doesn't, for me, it doesn't diminish it one iota.
No, not at all.
No. Well, this was a lot of fun, Denby.
It was fun. I'm glad we're going to do a part 2. That'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. For that one, my idea was to potentially bring in our mother and our stepfather,
Oh man.
who basically
maybe we could put them on the end so we can still get some words in. Otherwise, we may not.
that's
Do they
probably a
even
good
know?
call.
Do they know how to do Zoom, Brice? Come on.
They're gonna be watching this.
Sorry,
But they basically became Rockets fans, but kind of because of these runs and because of kind of watching our excitement over it, and now they're just as knowledgeable and just as rabid as us, really, if not more
Converted.
so. Yeah, we converted them to the gospel of the Rockets. God bless Akeem Olajuwon. God bless the '94 Rockets.
Thank you, Rockets.
Yeah, we love them.
Celebrate you.
Yeah, it's 30 years too long. We need another Rocket. We need another Rockets championship.
Well, technically it's been 29, but
Well, 94 to
95. We won in 95, so it's been.
Oh, right. Okay, gotcha. Yes, you're right.
But yeah,
Yes.
it's been too long.
Yeah, been too long. All right. Well, peace out.
Peace out.
Love you,
Thanks for
brother.
watching.